Thanks again for being here. We're going to get started. Just wanted to remind everyone the information in the book here on the Wi-Fi password is wrong. Password is digital1. That's the number 1. So just an extra digit at the end. Again, appreciate everybody coming out. Inaugural Digital Summit Detroit. So glad to have you here. I'm not going to waste your time though. Let's get going here. Disruptive content marketing with disciplined results. We're up Geoffrey Colon with Microsoft.
Thanks, man. Good afternoon, Detroit. Glad to be here. Back in the Motor City, or actually I like to call it the Techno City. So we can't talk about context without speaking a little bit about the nature of Detroit. So if I actually came out here, let's say, and talked about the Seattle Seahawks, of which I'm not a fan because I'm not originally from Seattle, it would probably go over everyone's head because you'd be like, what is this person talking about? That's not relevant to me. I have no understanding of it. So we live in a world now which is very contextual, and it's almost contextual by the millisecond in some respects based on digital media. So in order to really relate to this presentation, I figured let's speak in the context of what Detroit is known for. Obviously, it's known for innovation. It's known for car manufacturing. It's known for Motown. It's known for being a great rock city. It's also known for the birthplace of techno, which I'm a huge fan of and have been for probably about 20-some years. And, of course, huge festival that takes place here in May. Movement Festival, of which you can see a photo here. And in order to really talk about where we're moving in terms of contextual relevance with content, we have to think about things in what we are now noting is known as intersectional marketing. So what this means is, as marketers, we don't want to really think like marketers anymore. We don't really move beyond where we need to move with customers and other people if we think like marketers. We actually have to think like other personas, so to speak, in order to figure out the best ways of working with other people, understanding their behaviors, etc. So in this case, let's not think like marketers so much, and let's actually think more like DJs, so to speak, for today's presentation, at least in that context. So one of the questions that's constantly asked of me is, how do we keep up with all the pace of change that's actually happening out there? I have a book coming out next year that's actually called Disruptive Marketing. And in much of the book, what I explain to a lot of people is forget all the tactics and forget all the platforms. At the end of the day, we're all relating to each other as people. That is until robots take over, and hopefully that's not the case too much soon. But right now we have to relate to people, and we have to relate to people in terms of their everyday, in terms of what their context is, in terms of what they're going through, in terms of the different ways that they work with technology, so to speak. We talk a lot about mobile and emerging media, but we don't really understand why people use it. So we shouldn't think about platforms like Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn as much as why do people use those platforms? What does it allow them to do? So if we think more like a DJ for a second here, and I actually, show of hands quickly, who's a DJ here? It's 2016, I expect almost everybody to put their hand up if you're under the age of 30. It's not so much of a big deal as it was at one time when there was a higher barrier to entry, but one of the things that DJ culture has really understood well and how it sort of relates to content marketing is DJs understand their audience. It'd be very awkward to go into a particular location and play music that's not relevant to that particular audience. They already understand who that audience is because they understand their behaviors. They're there also to entertain the crowd. We forget something in marketing. 70% of people below the age of 35 like to be educated by entertaining content. Yet, show of hands, how many people see really boring, amplified messages on a daily basis from brands? Yeah, most of the room. because people aren't really thinking about the fact that we act differently when we're actually engaging with people on particular platforms. The third thing a DJ also does, he or she does, is they educate the crowd. So it's not enough just to sort of go and play the hits. Hey, how do you find the new hits? How do you find the new things, the new sounds that are actually emerging? And as content marketers, one of the things that's really interesting here is how do we find new things that people are going to relate to in terms of what our services are, what our products are, et cetera. So we have to think about the entertainment factor, we have to think about the educational factor. The fourth one that's really interesting is also quite unique because DJs at the end of the day are content curators. They're taking other people's music and they're programming it. Yet, I have never found a company that has ever really curated competitors' material. Yet that's probably the biggest way to get most engagement if we think about an online audience. Microsoft never talks about what Google's doing because they're too busy talking about what Microsoft's doing. Yet, it would probably be interesting if we talked a little bit more about what Google and Apple and other companies were doing, because people would be like, what's going on here? And it would grab your attention. One of the things that we need to note more of is we're no longer really in a society where it's about how many views we get, it's do we have a person's attention? Again, tying it back to human relations. A DJ also remixes other people's music. So social by design conversation. How do you take things that exist in an ecosystem and put a spin on it so it has your own feeling to it? And what we now realize is there is no real original content that exists. Almost everything is remixed in our world. Francis Lessig wrote a really good book about this that I encourage all of you to read. And then, of course, the big thing is our DJs have now, in the past 2 decades, have really moved into producing their own content. So this is the big one that I think a lot of brands and organizations put too much emphasis on. Let's produce our own, but they don't think about really how do they remix other people's, or the sort of content curation that they can participate in. So looking at how a DJ understands their audience, let's think again about some of the different things that exist in terms of how to relate to that audience. Short and long form content. There's different things that exist there in terms of how we create that. Thought leadership. This is a big one I always like to ask people when I attend different events and whatnot, especially when it comes to thought leadership, because people will say, what's the value in that? Yet what the good understanding is that the economy is moving more and more into an ideas economy. So if you can actually showcase your ideas, it's a great way to actually sell in a particular way that sort of comes across as a soft sell. Video, as we know, 90% of the internet by 2017 will be video. That's only 2 years away. 90%. Show of hands of how many people have trouble actually producing video. So we can talk some more about that. Customer connection with company employees. This is a huge one. How many people communicate on behalf of the organization they are working for or working with from their own personal brand? Not as many as I would think. This is the huge emerging area. It's not so much to think about that people want to be aligned with a company. People want to be aligned with the people that actually work at the company. So there's a big area that many organizations are really trying to sort of move headstrong into. Some companies don't like it so much because they feel if someone works at a company and then they leave, you're losing out on who those people are. However, this plays into big management systems now. How do you actually keep those people happy so they stay around because they're part of your team, so to speak? Tone of voice. We have a tendency of speaking too much like organizations and brands. Yet think about how most content is actually fed to us. It's fed in a news feed where we're talking to our brother or our sister or our mom or other people. So over-branded content and tone of voice makes little sense anymore. Yet we still do it. So it's good areas to actually look into. And where that audience likes to congregate online. So there's a tendency of many times organizations will say, we're going to build our house and we're going to force everyone into it. That's very unnatural if you think about it. You have to actually go and invite yourself to the party and see if you can get on the guest list and attend with everyone else. That's a big area of concern, I think, that many organizations still have because they have a tendency of thinking everyone needs to come to our owned property, whereas we really want to sort of go to where the rented property is. So we think about entertainment, how you're entertaining the crowd. So one of the things that we have to think about too in terms of how we show and we don't tell. Thought leadership is wonderful in the sense that it's usually written. People like long-form content, actually. But one of the things that people are also looking for is they're looking for other multimedia formats that they can pay attention to. So one of the things that's interesting is if you're writing a thought leadership piece or a written piece, how do you embed video into that? How do you embed audio into that? How do you put a slide share presentation into that? Think of the ways that, again, how do people ingest information? How do they learn? We have a tendency of thinking maybe too much on the left side of our brains. Hey, everyone likes to read. When we actually have to think about left and right brainers. Hey, some people might like to watch video, some people might like to listen to audio, some people might want to look at a deck. So combining all of those is a good way to sort of maximize how much you can actually sort of work with your crowd and entertain them. Again, how do you relate to people? What's the context of the scenario? Again, we don't want to just jump into things thinking that people will understand sort of the context of the conversation. This is why when people ask me the question, what's your content calendar look like, Jeff, for the next year? I laugh. I don't know what's going to happen in 8 months from now. I don't know what's going to happen in 8 hours from now. So the best thing to sort of learn here is you want to almost be like a yoga instructor rather than a weightlifter. Weightlifter plans their deadlift, and they bend over, and they lift something real heavy. In yoga, you're sort of just flowing with the motion, and you're able to move with the sense of the time and what's happening around you. This is the hardest thing for, I think, most organizations to understand, because if you don't have agility built into your company, you have a very hard time, I think, in this new world of actually relating to people. So that falls into sort of interconnecting with popular trending samples and topics in the web zeitgeist. And then inciting sharing of the experience. So we now know that more and more people obviously love the social web for being able to sort of share much of this entertainment or interesting content with others, because it lets them fit into a sort of a psychology of sharing mode. It makes them either look smart, or it makes them look funny themselves or humorous themselves by being able to share things that are interesting and relatable to others. So how does a DJ also go and educate the crowd? Well, one of the things that's also very interesting, I think, in this day and age is no one wants to offend other people when it comes to business. So they don't really have a POV. So you'll have people who will say, cloud computing is a great thing, but they won't explain what could be detrimental about it. You don't have people who say that email is actually a waste of time, that we should be moving more toward applications like Slack and Yammer and things of that nature. But POVs are interesting because they cause debate. As long as you're not hurting anyone's feelings, I think, from a politically correct manner, debate is important because it actually educates people. Okay, what side am I on? Is it time for us to get rid of email and maybe move more toward agile communications? Or is this person totally nuts? It also allows us to sort of explain things in bits. So if we think about how people educate or they learn, and a lot of what we're doing now, I think, as marketers is really education. So show of hands, who majored in psychology here? Yes. Talk to me afterward. More and more of what we're actually doing is really trying to relate to people. So education is, how do people learn? What do they want to learn? Why do they want to learn it? The other thing that's also important in terms of the educational factor is, when people make content here, do you make it for one person in mind? Yes, no. Who said no? Who said no? No, you want to make it for a group of people. Because almost everything how companies almost make all decisions, unless they're a sole proprietor, is a group format. So we see a lot of articles now about collaboration. Yet when we make marketing materials, especially in the content area, there's a tendency of us to basically say, hey, this is going to go after the CMO. This is going to go after the director of digital. This is going to go after the manager. They have no decision-making power. I can say that myself. You work with a group of people to actually decide what decisions you're going to make. So almost everything you make now has to be educational from a perspective of how's the group going to make that decision. And I guess the final point here too in terms of education is there's a tendency of many organizations to overtly brand their content. Hey, let's make sure our logo's on it. Let's make sure our name is all over this. Yet if we think about the channels that we actually feed most of this content from, your brand name or your organization name is probably already on it. So overtly branded content actually doesn't perform as well as subliminal content. This is what's called the immersive state. Frank Rose talked about this in his book, The Art of Immersion, which is when everyone's shouting, what's the best way to sort of react to that? Go with a subliminal tone, whisper. So that's why overtly branded content in some respects is why you see so many people sort of moving away from it, which is why just last week, the #1 application in the iOS store was ad blocker application. Content curation. So like a DJ again, this includes content made by others. This is a really hard area, I think, for a lot of companies to get into because they don't want to offend, yet it's probably the way that they're going to gain the most attention. So I work on a product at Microsoft called Bing, which you can laugh. I'm sure most of you don't use it. And I always say to the team, hey, let's not talk about Google, because everyone knows that's sort of the competitor. How do we talk about what other people are using beyond that? So obviously it's a search tool, but younger audiences are searching less and less now. So how do we talk about how search fits into sort of a social landscape? Because there's a tendency now of thinking that people do either or, which we all know is a myth. We all use a variety of different tools. We search, we use social, we see things in physical realms. Hey, I see a sign. So there's a lot of discussion in terms of how do we talk a little bit more in terms of how we use content made by others to sort of stamp our POV on it. So think about the things other people are writing about that are in your space, and then figure out how do you actually respond to that in a different manner? Or how do you proactively do things that you know maybe other people will respond to, so you get that sort of interesting back and forth conversation. This allows customers who you're really trying to actually use content marketing to reach, to really sort of have a better idea of what you stand for, what your definition is, et cetera. So even if you don't necessarily have the most revenue or the most market share, people understand your differentiating factors. The other thing that's also interesting about this is content marketing, for as long as it's existed, and it has existed for a long period of time, isn't really about the one-off piece of material that you use. So like a DJ set, you don't measure that DJ based off the one song that they play. You measure based off of their entire evening. So when you actually are doing campaigns, you're going to have blips in your radar where some things are not going to work and some things are going to work. But it's really the entire campaign that you put together in terms of how that's going to be effective for your KPIs. Social by design conversation. So we now all speak in ways that we manipulate media to the best of our ability. Younger people are very good at this. That's why we live in GIF culture. We use a variety of different memes. So one of the things here is, how do we build ideas off of others, and how do we speak to them in a way that's relatable? One of the things that's actually interesting right now is there are more people who are decision makers that are of the age of 32 right now. So I did a sort of like a data intersection and looked at a number of people in the world of IT, I should say, that are 32 years of age. These people probably grew up with an Amazon account. They probably are relating to things in a way that's very different. Yet what do most companies issue to IT people in the form of content? Anyone have a good guess? The dreaded white paper. I mean, come on. I love them. I've put them together. But no one reads those on a mobile device. It's not conducive to behavior. So that's why I think you're seeing a lot more companies actually moving into sort of storytelling around the cloud in terms of sort of soap operas or telenovelas, things of that nature. And of course, original content. So this is an area a lot of us actually, I think, pay attention to, because we're able to put our own stamp on it and showcase our own sort of thinking and creativity and originality and creative destruction. So again, how do you do things that are a little bit different from maybe how everyone else is talking to everyone in the form of original content? So let's look for a second and go back to a couple questions here before we look at some things in terms of KPI measurement in some of these areas. So what we mean by disruptive is sort of the creative destruction of content. Because what we have now is we could probably, if we go into our own sort of social feeds, or we do searches and go onto company-owned properties, we could probably look at the majority of content that exists out there and put it into like 3 or 4 buckets. So how do you get out of those areas so you can actually move beyond the rest of the crowd, so to speak? So one of the things that we have to sort of ask ourselves is, what if we're designing around people? So instead of, hey, we're going to put this together because that'll allow us to drive a particular amount of KPIs, which leads to success, we need to ask some what-if questions. And the reason being is much of content marketing right now is sort of measured by what we call vanity metrics: views, shares, engagement, etc. The big thing that we want to actually look at is, are we changing states of mind, so to speak? So are we actually getting people to think a particular way in terms of their behavior? Are they going to change their behavior, so to speak? That's one area of content marketing that I think many of us haven't necessarily thought of, because we're so concerned about what's the ROI of content marketing that we haven't really looked at what's the behavior change that we can use with it. Very similar to, I think, when we think about the early days of radio and television. People like David Ogilvy were trying to actually think, how do you get behavior change to happen with what we're doing here? So, how do I know if any of this will work? Who read The Lean Startup here? Great book. All marketing is small batches now. So you do small batches, you put something together, you test it, you see if it works, and you keep iterating. So this is an area that marketing can learn from the software world. Because if you actually put everything together and you say, I have a whole year's worth of material and I'm going to go out with a campaign and it fails, it's going to be hard to actually sort of figure out what to do next there. So if you actually test and learn, it's probably the best thing that you can do. And how do you know if you actually will fail? We always talk about failure sort of in business culture. There is no failure in some respects because it's all learnings. If it doesn't work, you either pivot or you persevere. So there's things that you can actually learn from all of this. Hey, we did a video and it only got X amount of views and everyone bailed after the first second. Obviously, that was a bad video that you put together, and maybe it wasn't the best way to distribute it. How are we tracking much of this? So there's several KPIs that will help you, but there's not really one finite measurement. So again, many leadership will ask, what's the ROI of what we're doing here? A question I think many of us have to come back with is, well, if we're not actually using the web for how people are using it to share content, then what are we doing in this field to begin with? Most social platforms, as we know, come with built-in analytics, but there's a lot of third-party providers that are out there that can actually track a lot of campaigns. And then, of course, what's the most important metric? Engagement rate is probably the most important, and I talk about this with my team quite a while. It doesn't necessarily indicate if someone's going to buy from you. What it indicates is that people have actually paid attention to it. Remember what I talked about earlier. We're living in an attention economy. If someone actually takes a moment to like something or share it, or actually comment on it, or actually get in touch with you and say, hey, I have questions about your solution that you're selling, because I saw it in my news feed, then that's actually important to note because it means that you're actually resonating with them. And again, we want to resonate with people. So the objectives, I think most of us probably are using content marketing for brand awareness. Is anyone using it for anything else here? Direct sales. So I think most people are using it probably for brand awareness, getting people to know who you are, getting people to, reaffirming with sort of who your current audience is, getting people to know about a product, getting people reacclimated. Visits to your owned channels, of course. So if you're tagging content, how are you getting people basically to an owned channel so that you can maybe get more information from them? Maybe you're doing a lead generation campaign, something of that nature. Again, depends on the industry you're in. B2B and B2C might slightly differentiate in what they're trying to do. And then the social discussion around a particular topic. So going back to what I was saying before, if you're actually doing some really interesting objectives, you're going to have a lot of people talking about what it is that you actually are sort of standing for, so to speak of. So, what is the science of your customer? Who, by show of hands, knows all this data about their customers here? Ooh, good. The most important thing now, I think, in marketing is not who is your customer, it's who is not your customer. Not everyone has to be a customer. That's probably my one issue at Microsoft. Hey, everyone needs to be our customer. No, they don't. Not everyone's going to like our stuff. There's plenty of people who will, and those are the people we need to pay attention to, because that's how you can nurture a relationship. In a lot of ways, marketing is very similar to how you sort of have, you date or you're married to someone or you have a relationship with someone. How do you nurture that over a long period of time rather than sort of, hey, it's a one-off. I got that person into the acquisition system. I can forget about them now. So this is interesting in the sense that why do customers prefer some content over others? It's because they're tapped into a particular way of thinking. We know who they are and we know who they aren't. So we know what sort of tests that we can do because we know sort of who that pool of people is that we're trying to actually reach, so to speak. Why do Cheetos taste so good? Because they sort of look like they taste in some respects. Orange soda is, I think the reason we like orange and grape soda is because it has that color to it. One of the areas that we have to think about in terms of when you're putting content marketing together is how are people actually going to feel when they engage with this? I know that's a hard thing I know coming from social and search, that's sometimes a hard thing because you're always looking at the metrics. But again, we're talking about people. How are people feeling when they actually engage with your content? What is it going to make them do? What is it going to make them say? Is it going to make them happy? That's probably one thing that we want them to feel. Is it going to make them sad? That's probably not something that we want to evoke. So there's a lot we can, again, learn from visualization in terms of how we relate to things. This is also true in B2B. There's a lot of people who think hey, utility is all that I need to concern myself with. I have the best product. It works really well. There's no doubt in my mind that people are going to use this. Yeah, but how are you making them feel? If you're treating them like a bank exchange, they're not going to want to really utilize your services. So emotion, passion, and personal value is actually very large in B2B. This is a big area that I think content marketing can actually really sort of cover in this area. How do you make people feel in terms of the things that you want to sort of, the solutions that you want to provide for their businesses, so to speak? And this is interesting. We haven't gotten into this world yet. I'm sure it will definitely happen, but in advertising for a long period of time, we always were trying to get to people based on what they thought, so to speak. But we live in basically this information overload economy, that if there's no space to get in up here, where's the better place to try to maybe get to that person? Here. So a lot of things now are really moving toward heart sentiment. Hey, how does this company, yes, they make this great operating system. How does that make one actually feel when they can actually go and do productive things? In some respects, I actually think the best companies are like nicely colored wallpaper. They're in the background, sets a mood. You're able to just sort of do things and not realize about that they're there, so to speak. And in some respects, I think that's the experiential world we're moving to in the future when it comes to content marketing. Companies are actually going to evoke experiences and make people feel a particular way while being in the background. So on the discipline side of things, and this is probably the big takeaway here, the 5 factors that we want to think of when you're sitting down, besides thinking like a DJ, if that context didn't work for you, this one might. How do you think about these 5 areas when you're actually putting content together? So one of the big things that a lot of companies do is they sit down and they say, this is what we're going to generate, and then we're going to go out and test it. I'm a firm believer in what's called distribution science. How is that content going to reach someone, and where are they going to exist? And then you reverse engineer, based on that, what you're actually going to create. So search and social data actually acts as the first area. Who are the people we're trying to reach? What queries do they search for? What's the audience look like? Where are they in the world? Is it local? Is it national? Is it international? From there, what are the trending topics that are out there? Because if you actually plan something that you release 2 months from now and it's irrelevant, you're going to have to use a lot of paid media to actually get that to be seen, because it's not contextually relevant in some respects. So the other thing too is the creative insights that go into a lot of this material. What does this look like? How does it make people feel in some respects? Do you have a lot of different pieces? Do you have one that you break up into different pieces? What type of content actually performs best if you do sort of a lot of different pieces that you generate? The other one that's interesting here too is the social CRM piece. So the reason I actually put this here is once you have content that exists, if it's working well, people are going to actually start to talk to you. And what happens with a lot of companies? Hey, we don't have anyone staffed to do that. So it falls on deaf ears. So again, it's like that nurture relationship. Once that content goes out there and people hit publish, they have a tendency of forgetting, wait a minute, this is real data you're generating and real information that you can take in. And that's why you need a social CRM plan, because people are going to start to ask lots of questions and you want to actually be there, because that's going to actually help them get over the curve, that you're making them feel a particular way. KPIs. Social media metrics is obviously the big one. Brand awareness, website traffic, lead generation, sales. Look at ROI, 20%. I only want you to have that in case management is saying, we need to have the ROI of this. Show them this slide. This is a good one, actually. ROI isn't there yet. So again, in an attention economy, if someone says, why are we doing any of this? I don't know. Why don't we just sort of sit here and watch the bank account go to zero? You have to do some things to actually sort of be relevant in that particular area. This is the area, at least for now, where companies are investing. And then the key area lifts that we've seen here, the big one obviously, are the big three, are seriously consider purchase, interest, and likelihood to recommend. So those are the three ones that basically, when most people say, what are you going to gain from content marketing, those are the three that I would actually put vested interest in too. I'll end with this slide and then I'll let everyone ask questions because I'm running a little bit over. This is on my slide share, so I'll make sure I share that. But a couple best practices for everyone. Don't build on rented land. We know that algorithms shift quite a bit. So what that means is basically your experiences, you want to have them sort of diversified. It's like a financial portfolio. So that means have them live where customers live, but also put it somewhere else in case those customers actually get to an owned piece of property of yours. There's a tendency, I remember some of the tests we ran early on where we used to just do stuff within social, and then everyone was like, hey, how do we know if customers can actually sign up for this? And we're like, oh, we should have thought of that. Forget likes and followers. So one of the things that we actually think about here is some people actually use content marketing to gain more followers or people of their organization. We know that algorithms now make it almost impossible to really sort of retain those followers unless we're actually paying to reach a lot of them. So that's not a metric we want to really pay too much attention to. Know where your org has authority. So again, don't be afraid to take a stand in some areas, because if you know a particular vertical, you're going to want to showcase that to everyone else. And then map out a content and asset production plan. And what I had noted here before is try to go with the yoga approach. 8 weeks at the most if you can, because again, we don't really know where the world is moving over a longer period of time. And it's best probably to just sort of be as agile and flexible as possible. With that, I'll leave it open to any questions that anyone has. Or you can come see me actually afterward. I apologize, guys. I flew in on a red eye last night, so I'm a little bit on the tired side of things, but happy to talk to you afterward. So thanks again for your attention today, and best of luck in this area. Thank you.
Good job, Jeff.
How are you?
Doing good.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Lot to